Aside to playing Blue Doffy for the OP09 and OP10 format, there's also another leader that I've been playing a lot, and as you can tell from the thumbnail, I'm talking about Boa Hancock from OP07. This video will be a comprehensive guide for her which will include some deck lists, strategies, and matchups. I will include a sample list for both the OP9 and OP10 format. Let's do a quick breakdown of what the leader does and what she wants to do. Her effect is during your turn once per turn, when a character is removed from the field by your effect, draw one card if you have 5 or less cards in hand. The effect is basically telling you to go for a control build, netting you resources each time you bounce something off the field, but it's not that simple. I'll address this later on, but for now let's take a look at some sample deck lists. The core for the deck is mainly the same, 7 Warlords package, a couple of blockers and removal events. I'll go over some tech options at the end of this video. The only difference between an OP9 and OP10 list is Kuros, which came out in OP10. Kuros being a 7 cost is perfect because there will be some games where you want to go first as Hancock, and it fits the curve perfectly when going first. Having 9k power also means it will be tougher for the opponent to clear it. So now let's talk about the strategy. Earlier on I mentioned this deck would want to go for a control approach, but that's not true. Depending on the matchups, you'll either want to play defensively or offensively. In your first few turns, you want to play cards like Sengoku and Kaya to search out for the cards that you will need throughout the game. These are also key cards as they can be used as cost to be bounced back to hand with characters like Law and Jozu. Mid-game, you'll want to rely on your Jozu and Kuros to out-tempo the opponent while replenishing your resources and board advantage, eventually playing down your boss character 10 cost Kaido. Why do I like this deck? Aside to being the best girl, unlike Blue Doffy, which has a linear gameplay and plan, Hancock can pivot between two different strategies, like I mentioned earlier, defensive control or offensive. For the offensive strategy, it will be similar to how Doffy plays, playing lots of characters, going wide with Jinbei, and on top of that with strong removals, being able to maintain resources and a strong board. The offensive strategy is typically effective against decks with not much removals or those that doesn't interact with your board and relying on big bodies, for example, P. Luffy, Peach, Yellow Kid, and Bonnie. Next, for the defensive control strategy, the focus would be to interact with the opponent's board, consistently disrupting their plays with Jozu, Kuros, and finally Kaido. This strategy relies lesser on Jinbei. The control strategy is very effective against decks that tries to control your board with removals such as Shanks, Doffy, Usopp, and the mirror match. Next, I'll be sharing some tips on piloting this leader. From the deck list, you can see that there are a couple of cards that allows you to check your top few cards like Perona or even 3-cost Doffy. So before using your removals, you should play these characters to stack your top deck to put the stuff that you need on top. Then when you use your leader's effect to remove something, you get to draw a card. So for example, if you need an extra 2k counter or 1 cost law, you'll stack it to the top of the deck. You can also follow up the stack by playing Kaya to draw into those cards that you really need. This also helps to filter your deck by stacking the cards that you don't need to the bottom of the deck, or for you to plan out your next few turn plays. Another important tip is hand management, as you want to consistently use your leader's effect to draw through your deck, and in order to do that, you need to be able to maintain your hand cards through blockers or having enough counters. So you will need to know when the correct time it is to take hit or when you should counter out of it. Here's a simplified guide for that. If you have 5 hand cards going to 6 hand cards, avoid the attack. 4 cards to 5 hand cards, you can consider taking that attack. And if you have less than 4 cards in hand, you are free to take the attack. Now let's move on to the matchups. We'll start with the mirror match. The matchup is of course it will be even, being a mirror match. You'll want to go second, prioritizing cards like Jinbei, 4-cost Law, 7-cost Kuros, and Red Rock. The mirror match is almost guaranteed to be a long game with both players trying to out-tempo one another, so having a board advantage will be really crucial, hence why Jinbei is a key card for this matchup. Kuros is also a key card because he can only be affected by 2 cards in the deck, being Red Rock and Kaido, unless the opponent is running 9-cost Mihawk. Gravity Blade might be tempting to use when you see your opponent has a board of Jinbei and other characters, but do take note to only use it when you're in an advantageous position. The winner of the mirror match will be the player who is able to maintain their board while taking out the other players Kuros and Kaido, which is why I also listed Red Rock as a key card. Next will be Shanks. You have a favorable matchup and you want to go second. And the key cards for these matchups will be your Jozu, Kuros, and Kaido. The strategy would be to maintain tempo by using your Jozu, Kuros, and then in the late game, drop your Kaido. For this matchup, Jinbei may not be as useful as Shanks can easily get rid of them with cards like 7-cost Whitebeard and Rayleigh. Some tips for this matchup: when the opponent plays cards like Bagman or Rayleigh, you shouldn't address it with cards like Red Rock, because those cards should be reserved for Shanks or Goldie Roger. Instead, you should bounce these cards back with Kaido. Try to deploy tons of blockers to protect your life against big attacks. Also, try not go too low on life, as Shanks does have ways to bypass your blockers with cards like Lime Juice or Goldie Roger. Moving on to Bonnie, you have a favorable matchup again, best to go second. The key cards for this matchup will be your Jozu, Kuros, Tenkos Kaido and Red Rock. The key cards are very important for this matchup and needs to be prioritized, because if you don't have them, you will lose the game. Similar to the Shanks matchup, Jinbei and friends are not as effective, so focus on playing down your bigger bodies and digging through your deck. Some cards to take note of against Bonnie will be the 3-cost Tashigi and 9-cost Shanks. 3-cost Tashigi can prevent you from removing their green characters and is usually paired with 8-cost Kid. So take note when you're trying to bounce them using Kaido or Red Rock. Best would be to keep a 4-cost Law to bounce their Tashigi first, then follow it up with a Red Rock. 9-cost Shanks is also a threat because it can get rid of your Kaido after it attacks, so try not to attack with Kaido unnecessarily unless you are in a favorable position. Next would be the BDIF Blue Doffy. This matchup I would say can go from even to slightly disadvantaged, from 50-50 to 45-55. The key cards for these matchups will be your Jinbei, 4-cost Law and Kuros. You want to go first here so you can play your Kuros on curve. Doffy doesn't have any answer to Kuros, which is why it is really strong here and also your key card. Whoever is able to have a board presence and control the opponent's board will win. Tips for this matchup will be try to protect your characters. If you can counter them with one card, do that. Any attacks that require 2 or more cards to counter, block them using your blockers. Gravity Blade might sound fantastic, but again, only use it when you're in a winning position. Doffy can easily build his board, so instead focus on building yours, then proceed with Gravity Blade. A safe situation I would say is when you have a couple of big bodies or attackers and some blockers. Cards like Red Rock is almost useless for this matchup, so it is not a priority for you to dig it out, but triggering Red Rock or Gravity Blade for this matchup will be really strong. Moving on to Usopp, a new leader and popular one from OP10, I would say the matchup is 50-50 and you typically want to go first to prevent the opponent from pulling off the Rebecca and Kuros combo early. The key cards for this matchup is your Jozu, Kuros and Tenkos Kaido. The strategy is straightforward: build your board with big bodies like Kuros and Kaido and maintaining tempo. Always take note of the opponent's hand cards, because at times when you bounce cards back to their hand, they might not be able to use the leader's effect to draw, so plan carefully before making a move. If you're able to drop Kaido, you will usually be in a good position to win, but aside to that, the Jinbei and Law combo may not be as effective here. The only target for Law in this matchup is usually just Bartolomeo and Ideo. Attacking with 5k attackers also makes them vulnerable to the rush characters when their stage is on play. Next would be Purple Luffy, also another top meta contender. The matchup is slightly favorable and you'll want to go first. For this matchup, the key cards will be your Jinbei and Law. Use the Jinbei and Law combo to tempo early game and then proceed to Jozu, Kuros and finally Kaido. They will have no other way to clear them unless they are playing Gamma Knife. Always use your blockers to prevent yourself from going down too low, as cards like Sanji can rest your blockers and then attack you for game. So play around it. Overall, a rather straightforward matchup. Next would be Lucci, the whole reason why Hancock was bad in OP08. Back then, Lucci was really popular and it has a really unfavorable matchup, but if you do meet them, you want to go second to delay their Moria plays and try to build your board with Jinbei and Law as soon as possible. Your goal is to build your board, maintain it before the opponent drops down Moria. Your 1-cost characters are very vulnerable in this matchup as well, so try not to leave them out for too long. You need to use your Law and Jozu bounces efficiently. And reason why Hancock has a bad matchup against Lucci is because they can remove your characters and build their boards more efficiently than you. So you might be able to win if your opponent manages their resources poorly. Next is the new kid on the block from OP10, Yellow Kid. You have a favorable matchup against Kid. You want to go first so you can drop your Kuros on curve and prevent them from playing their 7-cost Law first. Your key cards will be your Jinbei, Law, Jozu, Kuros and 10-cost Kaido. As Kid relies on dropping big characters and small blockers, tempo strategy will work great against them. Setting up multiple Jinbei is also great as it helps to chip down their resources, then following that up with your tempo characters. Mid to late game, Kaido will be very good, but at the same time, they will have tons of big bodies like Ace and 8-cost Kid. Use your Red Rock for these targets while deploying blockers. You need to be careful of X-Drake though. Finally, for the last leader I have on this list, the ever annoying NL. The matchup I would say is even to maybe slightly disadvantaged. Your key cards here will be your Kaido and Red Rock, and maybe Pudding if you're playing her. You want to go second so you can drop your Kaido first. Your game plan is to repeatedly play Kaido and Red Rock, removing the opponent's threat. So if you miss any of these cards, you will probably lose because they have definitely more big bodies and removals than you do. Another strategy you can go for is using the Jinbei law to consistently poke the opponent's resources away, but this is not as effective as they have cards like Geratsu and Yamato to pop them. Overall, NL is a very annoying deck to deal with, and they have an easy way of dealing with your Kaido in the form of Raigo. The last part of this video will be your tags. Depending on your local metagame, you might want to include these cards. Mihawk for when you're expecting a lot of mirrors, Pudding when there's a lot of NL or Black Yellow Luffy, and you can also consider increasing the counts of some of the cards in the decks like 7-cost Kuros and even Gravity Blade. With EBO2 coming out and NL is expected to be one of the top tier leaders, I will consider adding more Pudding. You can also consider Perfume Femur, though I don't think it's really needed. And that comes to the end of this guide. Let me know if I've missed out any leaders in the comment, and feel free to ask me any questions you might have. I'll try to answer all of them. Next week I'll be talking about a certain yellow leader that will be getting some crazy support, but until then, drop a like if you found this video interesting or helpful. Consider subscribing if you haven't, and of course, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.